craziest shit happened in a 24-hour window in podcasting. And one end, you've got Joe Rogan's podcast getting a $100 to $200 million contract. And then on the other hand, you have the Call Your Daddy saga, which I've been trying to fill you in about, but I don't think you give one or two shits about. But
yeah, I don't really care about it. But yeah, all I know about it is what I've heard from you.
So here's what's going on. I'm gonna take you back to the beginning. We're gonna take you from the beginning to where it is now.
Can we do like a Cliff Notes version? Like maybe try not to go in too much detail.
Perfect. Cliff Notes version.
Okay.
2 young 20-year-old chicks meet up, and again, I could be wrong with it, but we're gonna wax poetic. We're gonna we're gonna cut the corners on this one. They meet up at South, and again, some of the details might be wrong, so just leave a comment if I'm wrong. These 2 chicks, Alex and Sophia, they become friends randomly at like South by Southwest, some festival. They're having drinks at a bar and they start talking about sex one night. They're just at the bar talking about sex. Next thing you know, dudes probably just like, hungry for some of that action, start surrounding them, and they get an audience that starts listening to them. And someone says, "You guys should do this." And so they're like, "All right, cool." So they form a podcast called Call Her Daddy, and they do 2-3 episodes. And then all of a sudden, Portnoy at Barstool wants to have them come on. So then he hires them, basically buys their podcast, buys the intellectual property of it, and pays them each $70,000 their first year in this contract.
So that's their salary to produce 1 episode a week? Is $70,000?
Yeah. And Sophia just does the episode.
Wait,
Alex,
$70,000 each?
Yeah, each. Sophia does the podcast, but Alex was the one who edits it all together. They shoot for like 3 hours and edit it and make it all tight. They do all the swipe ups and the Instagrams, this and that. And the whole podcast is them apparently just talking about like sucking dick, celebrity bangs, and they're in that kind of like young 20s thirsty New York socialite scene. So they start doing the podcast. It goes bananas. It just goes off. It kind of hits this market that nobody else had hit, and it becomes one of the top podcasts in the world. Because of bonuses, they both end up making like over $400,000, close to $500,000 their first year just in bonuses. So then what happens is, and again, this is from me listening to different sides of the story, which is so funny as an indie podcaster to hear this, because when we wake up and we have a new Patreon member, I'm like, "Hey, babe, we got a new $5. That's really cool." And then these girls are making almost $500,000 but that's the market, right? That's the market. So anyway, a lot of people start getting in their ear telling them they're underpaid because, of course, Barstool's making money. They're making way more than that, but they're also pushing out their content.
And think about, men in the podcasting game, which is not hard to do because it's mostly men. But if you think about other wildly successful podcasts like Joe Rogan or Bill Burr or whatever, people who are kind of one-man shows and they own all of their content. Like Joe Rogan, I mean, think about how much money he's making on YouTube. Oh yeah. Just the YouTube, not sponsorships.
Millions just
YouTube. Not anything else, not merch, not sponsorships, just
selling out
YouTube.
Arenas.
Because that's his own thing. It's his own intellectual property.
But these girls were one was just collecting unemployment, making vlogs. So I'm saying that's where they were until Barstool bought them. So that's
where everybody was until something clicked.
But my buddy is a composer, and he got hired to compose the video game of Star Wars. So Lucas Productions or whatever it's called sends you to their villa, has you do it, and then you walk out of there with no memory cards attached to you. They search you to make sure because they own the IP. So that's what this whole kerfuffle, is that a term, has been over IP. So what happened was they heard from.
But if you think about it, they are the talent. I understand that Barstool came in and kind of gave them, just like, being on a podcast network kind of gives you that boost. Barstool already has their fan base. They already have a solid cult of people who listen to them, who watch the things that they recommend, who listen to the things that they recommend. So while it's true that Barstool had some sort of piece in catapulting them to the next level,
legally.
It doesn't matter. I hate when you interrupt me like this because it resets my brain. My point is, getting to astronomical success happens for multiple reasons. But if you were a shitty podcast and Barstool was pushing a shitty podcast, it wouldn't be successful.
Of course, they've got the talent. Of course.
So it really, don't discount that their stories, their storytelling, their talent, their comedy,
dick sucking,
all that they do is a big part of the reason why it got successful. Yeah, it's nice to have a boost from a big company with a large audience.
And they were rightfully bonused and also renegotiated their contracts. But what happened was they're under a 3-year contract, and I guess legally it's you're not supposed to be renegotiating outside. And what happened was they just ghosted on Barstool starting in mid-April. So every episode that they didn't show up, Barstool was losing $100,000 in sponsorship.
But that shows just how valuable their podcast is.
I get it, but don't take the side of them necessarily because they're breaching a contract.
Okay, but people get put in shitty contracts all the time. I mean, Kesha was forced to work with her rapist, allegedly.
Yeah, well, these people were bonused up to $500,000, so it's a little...
Well,
they were treated well for their overperforming their contract. But if they're losing,
you said the numbers to me earlier, $100,000 per episode times 52 weeks, so a year, $5 million.
So let us know. Yeah, sure.
That's what you said.
I'd have to do the math, but that sounds about right.
You've got your phone right next to you.
$100,000 an episode for 52 episodes sounds like $5.2 million. That sounds like the right deal. Could I be off by a decimal? Maybe.
Yeah, which is a big difference.
Well, if they make 100,000 and 52 is 5.2 million.
Okay,
divided by 2, you're talking about 2.6 million each in revenue. But
bare minimum,
New York City studios,
bare minimum. So it might actually be more if they're talking about like they're losing $100,000 in revenue. They're probably getting way more than that in sponsorship money. They're paying out salary, so their net loss is $100,000 per episode. So there's no reason if they're bringing in over $5 million in ad sales that these people shouldn't be allowed to renegotiate to get a bigger piece of the pie because honestly the show wouldn't exist without them.
So
they are the talent. They can try and bring in new people.
Okay, so
they own the IP. They could bring in new people to host this podcast, but they won't do that. You know why? Because they know that other people it's not the same.
So let me catch you up.
They're the talent, and they're a big part of why that show is successful.
And they stuck together. Sophia and Alex stuck together, and no one really knew what was going on. But then we find out that apparently they had been shopped around to other podcast networks, including Wondery. Apparently, they were going to go over to Wondery, which we'll talk about later in this episode when we interview Mike. But hold on.
Let me interject. When you're trying to negotiate a raise for yourself at your corporate advertising job or whatever, your fashion design job, whatever it is, if you've been at a company for a long time and you think you're due for a raise and you've got a 6-month review coming up, you can get comps. Why wouldn't you get comps? Go on Glassdoor.com, find out what other people in your same position are making, or you're job hunting because you're not really necessarily 100% all in at your current job. So maybe you take a couple interviews. Maybe a headhunter calls you. Somebody's trying to recruit you. So you take a couple interviews just to wait and see. And you get an offer from a company and that offers double your current salary. And you're like, holy shit, wow, my current employer has been drastically undervaluing me all this time. And you don't know for sure that you want to make the move to the other company. Maybe you want to stay at your current company, but you bring that offer to your boss, to HR, whatever. And you say, listen, I've got this other company trying to recruit me and they're offering me this salary. I'm content here, but I would like a promotion and I would like a raise of whatever percentage.
Of course. So this is all what happened, but you can't, when you're under a 3-year contract, you in good faith can't go negotiate with other people. And what happened, and this is a big deal, is that Sophia's boyfriend is a senior VP at HBO. So he's basically hired to do HBO shit, but he's trying to get his chick a job and use his connections.
But he's not her manager. If he facilitates a couple introductions, it's not like...
But so apparently he puts his neck on the line
deal
for them. And then Alex, who's the one who edits and does all the work, is like, oh my gosh, but Barstool's actually come back. Barstool offered them like $500,000 up front, bonuses, merch, and Barstool offered to give them their IP back when their contract was over, which is basically like, when you're done making $500,000 a year here, well, Barstool said, we'll cut the contract 6 months short. All you got to do is show up for the next year. Well, and at the end of it, we'll give you everything you want. Because right now, if they went to Wondery or somewhere else, they're going with their name Sophia and Alex. They're not going with Call Her Daddy and every little thing that came out of it. Every saying, every merch, every little thing they don't own. They gave that up at $70,000 a year plus bonuses. So what happens is we find out that the girls were not on the same page. Once Barstool offered to give them the world, Sophia was still like, no, we're out. And Alex was like, I don't think we're out. So that you got the biggest podcast in the world, essentially, at least for women, the biggest podcast in the world splits up. Alex comes back. Now Alex is going back as like the savior, the person who actually produces it, edits it, does all the work. She's going back to Barstool, and apparently her episode will come out this Wednesday. Whereas Sophia is left with the slimy HBO exec who tried to stab everyone in the back. HBO also did a hit piece on Barstool. So there's like, they're bloodthirsty. It's weird. And all of a sudden, Sophia has nothing. She doesn't have the podcast she co-created.
I mean, there is something to be said about don't bite the hand that feeds. There is something to be said about dance with the one that brung you. But, listen, you're just reading gossip on the internet. Okay.
Oh, I'm New York Post. I'm all in it.
You don't know exactly what's going on. There's got to be a reason that Sophia still said no when they got offered all that they were asking for. And maybe it's just a toxic environment. Maybe she doesn't want to do it anymore. Maybe she wants to do something else.
It's sad that they were best friends and they actually didn't record at the studios. They did it on their own time, and they were just like, they kind of became socialites out of it. They were making crazy money. Yeah, it's too bad, but it's fascinating to watch because this could be easily, and again, I know this has not much to do with what we do as a podcast, but it's interesting as podcasters that much money was being thrown around. And I will say that they were sort of doing a good job in one aspect of negotiating because they were able to get Barstool to give them the world. I mean, they really were able to
it shows just how valuable. Yeah,
by the end of it, Barstool only was taking like a majority of the liquor sales, and I'm going, liquor sales? They have a fucking liquor? Like, you're killing it in podcasting when you have a liquor. Like there's only a couple radio shows.
You mean at live shows or something?
No, like they're making their own liquor that's probably gonna be sold in stores or some shit like that. No, I'm not kidding. It's crazy. Anyway, and there's there's other podcasters that have. There's one guy that has his own type of sangria. Like when you're big, or there's a few comics that have tequilas that have like made a crazy amount of money because when you do get into like higher end beverages, you can make a fortune. But anyway, it was interesting that to watch the drama unfold as indie podcasters that we are, thinking of what can we do to go into our lives with the mindset that we're worth something like that amount of money. When these girls were just shooting the shit and they had something they believed in and it took off, and I'm not saying we're a failure and they're a success, but what the difference is between starting a wildfire in a movement and what's not is interesting. And I think, and not to say that we can't break, baby, we're going to be breaking big time now that there's, now that the Call Her Daddy audience is all fragmented. Come over to the SAP, baby. Because once they get too old for dick sucking, they're going to want relationship advice like we have here. Because there's no dick sucking happening here, folks, over here at the SAP. Let me tell you. Anyway, so I don't know. It's interesting, though. It's interesting that there's this kind of crazy money being thrown around for people that are just creating audio. It's like we're living in the 1930s. This is all for radio, podcast. Very interesting.